Okay, so this is Choice of a Lifetime by Naveena Shine, Chapter 1, Part 2. The oohs and ahs and cries of, "It's coming, it's coming, it's here, this is Herman, a beautiful baby boy," were the most pleasant part of this experience. He could feel in the energy of the sounds the love, excitement, and thrill emanating from these strange personages moving around the room. This gave him a feeling of having arrived, of welcome and of pleasure at being here. But as for the rest, what the hell was that digging into his eyes? Needles that penetrated even when he endeavoured to keep his lids tightly closed. The tender membrane seemed to be under vicious attack from the rays generated by the bright hospital lights and contracted in pain at the continual assault. Almost immediately this agony was eclipsed as his eyes shot open with horror at a resounding blow inflicted on his bottom. It stunned him with its shock and threw his body into turmoil. What was this? Something was entering his mouth. Something cold and intangible. It was rushing in and out through the gaping hole. There was no way he could make it stop, and his whole inside of his chest heaved uncontrollably. The strange thing was that each new gulp of air brought such a tingle and glow to his body that Lance felt wonderful and began to breathe with joy and abandon. With every inhalation he imbibed more and more of life. In the midst of the excitement of this discovery, he noticed that a very subtle change had come over him, causing a chill to creep through his bones. It was not so much that he felt his body was missing any of the nourishment that had sustained it for all its life. It was more that he knew that a separation had occurred between him and his life's source. The realization filled him with a fear similar to the one that had first paralyzed him, but on a different level. This was more concerning the feeling that he had been totally abandoned, absolutely rejected, callously torn apart from the support system that was all he knew. Without the umbilical cord connecting him to his mother, he would die. There was nothing else for him. All he could do was wait and be afraid. With such tension underscoring Lance's whole vision, he could only be irritated at the hands that were pushing and prodding and probing at his limbs and organs. He could feel no sense of love, just a cold, clinical appraisal, perfunctorily done, as if he were a delicate prize vegetable being readied for the market. Although the horror and pain he had suffered was superseded by a vast array of new experiences, the ordeal had a huge impact on the totality of the organism. It had left a residue and a vibration within his system that would impart a taste of itself onto all future impressions. The warm bath was very comforting experience for his tortured body. With all the emotion and upset, he had not really noticed that the temperature of the air was so much cooler than what he had been used to in the womb. The warm water enveloping his body returned it to the sensations of security and comfort he had almost forgotten. Soft hands gently rubbing away all the debris of his birth, and the massage of the soap and cloth left his skin clean, glowing and vital. He was even happy to be trundled up in a strange soft constrictions, as they imparted their warmth to him and soothed his mounting apprehension. Deep in the pit of his stomach lay the source of his troubles. There was an emptiness that had never assailed his body before, and it was growing with every breath, threatening to sweep him away completely. Utter helplessness prevailed. He neither knew what it was nor how it could be prevented, but it was steadily gnawing away at his insides, causing him to be absolutely desolate. The fear surfaced, overpowering all that he was, and once more from his inner depth came the cry of his soul for self-preservation. This time it came out as a cry that was audible down the centuries, across the reaches of time, and almost immediately it was stifled by a huge, soft object obstructing its pathway. In the throes of its struggle, the tiny tongue touched against the object of its salvation. Taste buds puckered at the warmth of the liquid stuff and yearned for more. Sensory devices hinted that the source was close by. Where was it? You can't hide this from me. I'm going to find it. Frantic tongue searching, probing, drew in the mouth to help its quest. Tantalizing tastes served to prolong its frenzy, sharpen its intent until movement was triggered. The well was breached and survival ensured. Long and deep, Lance drank of the nectar, contentment seeping through his bones, washing away the nightmare of his birth. Like a war-torn hero, he had survived the worst battle of his life, and now he was happy to drop it from his memory, begin life anew, not knowing that the scars received in this deadly fray had set the foundations for determining what could happen in the future. Within the next few days, Lance learned the ground rules that would help him to survive in this strange alien world. Helplessness was his hard reality, and priority number one became to alleviate the fear that this generated in him. He found that by crying out to the universal source, whenever the gnawing in his stomach became too much to bear, he could bring forth relief almost immediately. When he tried to deal with other discomforts, it did not work quite so well at first. If he was cold or wet, or the pain was there after filling his belly, he felt powerless. The cries he gave during this time did not impart such terrible anguish as his hunger ones engendered, but were more forlorn and feeble. His mother quickly learned to distinguish which needs had to be satisfied, and sprang speedily to the rescue. Gradually, Lance learned that he could control his mother's responses just by giving the appropriate signals, and this gave him a feeling of security in his world of helplessness. Once he had achieved a modicum of control over his necessities, he was able to relax and take note of other details. His mother's smell was the most wonderful aroma to filter through his senses. It was more than just the biscuity smell of milk spilling out and drying on her breasts, or the sweet muskiness permeating through the pores of her skin. It was a promise of glorious warmth and comfort that would envelop his body in the glow of joy and contentment, spreading from his very centre, radiating happiness and love. He learnt to associate this wonderful odour and soft touch with all the things that were essential to his existence. On occasions, his mother would not answer his calls so quickly, or else he could feel within her emotions that he did not comprehend. These moments would bring up all that old fear from deep within him. Sometimes she would be angry and would handle his body with a harshness and roughness he did not like or understand. It did not make any difference that the source of her anger was nothing to do with him, but a reaction to some incident in her own life which caused her pain, misery, and frustration. Lance could not know about her troubles, as they were not yet part of his world, but he could clearly feel the darts of her pent-up fury falling on his wide-open senses. His only conclusion could be that she was angry with him, and that he must in some way be responsible for bringing on this violence. Since he so much depended on her for his survival, an incident of this nature rocked him to the core. He could not afford to lose the mainspring of his life, and he felt devastated to know that somehow he was the cause of each adversity. By so accepting the blame and the guilt for his mother's state of being, a new possibility arose within his mind. Since it was his fault, then it had to be him. It was up to him to find some way of making amends. He determined that he must do whatever was in his power to prevent the emotions and actions that were such a threat to his survival. This was the decision, repeated many times in varying forms, that proved to be the main source from which all other decisions of his life would spring. It remained in his subconscious as the first building block upon which the structure of his mind would be based. He decided that he must endeavour to tailor all of his responses so that whenever he could manage it, they would placate, modify, and please this person who supported his life. He would try to do what she wanted, to become what she expected, bow to her will, and believe what she wanted him to believe. Against her he had no defences. He did not know that by doing this he was giving up all rights to be himself, to laugh when he felt laughter, to cry when he felt crying, to be angry when he felt anger, and to love when he felt loving. A shadow was interposed between his real self and the one that he was manufacturing out of his fear. This shadow was to block his sun and dam up the springs that watered his soul. It would take only a few short years to thicken and darken and trap him on the outside of himself, leaving him wandering till he forgot about this place that it once existed. Although he tried so hard, very often Lance failed miserably. He didn't know the rules. They were so hard and complicated, and he couldn't understand what was behind them. Sometimes the signals seemed to completely contradict each other. For instance, it was a wonderful sensation of relief when his body evacuated itself into the folds of that soft cloth surrounding the middle of his body. But when he sensed his mother's faint distaste in her task of cleaning it up, he immediately felt that he had done something wrong. Later, he could not imagine why she would try and make him sit on a hard, hollow seat for so long, and he had no idea what he was supposed to do. even when he laughed and gurgled at her, it did not take away that look of disappointment and frustration he could see on her face. It seemed he had not done whatever it was that she wanted, and he knew that she was displeased with him. However, during one such session, he could not prevent himself from doing what he knew was distasteful to her, and it all came out, pouring out beyond his control. In his guilt, he expected to be punished by the withdrawal of her love, and was amazed that now quite the opposite seemed to happen. She was truly delighted, almost delirious with excitement, and imparted her feeling to him with great warmth and joy. Another time, he was enjoying being held in a bowl of deliciously warm water, his mother playfully splashing the waves over him, squealing in ecstatic pleasure at the tingling sensations all over his body. Suddenly, for no apparent reason, his mother stopped in mid-play, frozen for a moment in horror, eyes fixed on the lower part of his body. Embarrassment and shame spread through her bloodstream, communicating itself immediately to Lance, who felt it as his own. He could only conclude that the pleasure his body was experiencing was somehow responsible for this reversal in emotion that had nearly floored him. To bring such a reaction, it must be dangerous. Indeed, and in the future, he would have to curb the release of such ecstasy. Most of his time, Lance spent either eating or sleeping, being held in loving arms, or just lying in his cot. He enjoyed aimlessly exploring, touching and tasting his hands and feet, shaking colourful rattles and lunging at bright shapes that were strung up to delight his eyes. His body continued its process of building, expanding, developing, interrelating one part of his growth with another. His mind sifted and sorted, categorized and classified all the information he was receiving from each of his senses. In its turn, it sent out modification messages to the biological construction crew that was hard at work. His underlying fear was reflected in a general tension throughout the muscles, where tendons pulled taut as they readied for instant action. Blood vessels grew enlarged to accommodate sudden engorgement resulting from pressure changes, and a hard knot centered in the pit of his stomach. Neurosynapses deadened slightly to raise the threshold of the perception of danger. This would give a chance for Lance's defenses to take effect before they were submerged in the terror of that ungovernable force. Bodily changes acted upon the mind, and psychological changes interacted with the body. Together, they formed an interdependent unity, determined by the experiences Lance was encountering and the decisions he was making. Once made, these decisions had no place in Lance's thoughts, and as time went by, they were pushed further and further away, far below the level of consciousness. End of the first chapter.